Hey everyone, Jordan here from PSP Fitness Ottawa, today bringing you a Ruck March workshop. If you're a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, this kind of training is pretty relevant as you've probably ruck marched at least once in your life within your career. Now, ruck marching is its own form of training. As you guys know, it's an endurance, and carrying something on your back for a long period of time with heavy loads can get challenging. And today we're going to show you proper injury prevention, programming, warming up, prepping the ruck, prepping yourself for the outdoors, and the cool down itself. Let's get started. Let's talk about injury prevention for a minute. Now, if you guys have done extensive ruck training in the past, you have probably experienced an RSI at some point. RSI means repetitive stress injury, as opposed to an acute injury. An acute injury is something like a twisted ankle, a broken back, blown tendon, or a dislocated shoulder, something that happens in an instant. Whereas an RSI, repetitive stress injury, is something that happens over time through repetition. That could be shin splints, sore knees, tight hips, low back pain, chronic low back pain, as well as shoulder tightness and upper back tightness. Now, a lot of this is prevalent within any form of training. However, it can be prevented through something as simple as proper programming, proper warm-up, proper cool-down, taking the time to take the preventative measures. So if you've experienced one of these RSIs in the past, ask yourself a few questions. Ask yourself, have I taken the time to do the proper warm-up? Have I done a warm-up that's relevant to this sort of training? Have I taken an adequate amount of rest and recovery with rest days and stretching outside of training? And was I pushing myself too hard, too fast? The steady progression that we talk about with regards to programming is crucial so that we don't injure ourselves from overtraining. So making sure that the progression that we focus on is based on slow increases either in distance, the amount of weight we're carrying, or our duration of activity, seeing how fast our pace is. These sorts of principles are going to be talked about more in depth as we move into programming and are very relevant to injury prevention. Now, programming for ruck march training may seem tedious, but it is necessary for injury prevention. I've had experience with CAF members in the past where day one, a CAF member decides to go out for 4 kilometers carrying 40 pounds. Next day, they go out 40 pounds and they're feeling great. They decide to do 9 kilometers. Day 3 comes around, still no rest, but they are striving for that steady progression. And although they're feeling sore, they decide to put in 50 pounds and go for another 9 kilometers, looking for that rapid progression. And day 4, they wake up and they have back pain, they have hip tightness, bad knees, and they lose all motivation and go back to square one. Taking the time to set yourself up for steady progression through slow increases is paramount to creating successful progressive results with actual ruck march training. Let's talk about an actual program starting from a beginner's perspective, and we'll talk about the different ways that we can go forward with regards to distance, the pace, as well as the load that we'll be carrying. Let's take a look at an example of a beginner program for ruck marching. Let's say we start off ruck marching 2 times per week. That way, we're taking time to recover in between days and wearing off any delayed onset muscle soreness. We have 40 pounds in our ruck and go 4 kilometers on Monday. On Thursday, we ruck march again with 40 pounds and then go 5 kilometers that day, increasing our distance by 1 kilometer. Now, this is just the beginning stage of a beginner program. So we'll just focus on distance and weight for now, and we'll worry about the time later. If you're unsure on distancing your routes, I recommend getting a tracking app on your phone or Google mapping the route prior to the session. Now we have a few options for progressing into next week's training. We can either keep increasing our distance while keeping the same 40 pounds in our ruck and worry about increasing the weight later, or we can stagger column our progress by adding weight Monday, then adding distance on Thursday, or we can implement strength training by keeping the distance shorter and adding more weight. While option 3 tends to show better results for more intermediate athletes and CAF members, let's go with option 2 for this example and stagger column it as we are just starting out as beginners. Now, these increases are slight and seem minor, but they do add up over time. As you can see, we increase our weight from 40 to 45 pounds for 5 kilometers, and on Thursday we keep those 45 pounds, and now we're going for 6 kilometers. We do this steady progression for 6 weeks, and by the end, we're going for 10 kilometers with 65 pounds. And after that, we take a deload week. So a deload week is sort of a recovery period where we're not doing too much intensity for our actual ruck march, and we can still go out for our ruck march training. However, the weight and the distance should be cut in half. So if you're feeling that it's challenging with 65 pounds in your ruck, but you're able to do it for the 10 kilometers, during the deload week, it should be 30 to 35 pounds in the rucksack, with about 4 or 5 kilometers, no more than that. And after that, you can move into your second phase of the program. Let's start talking about implementing time within the second phase of a beginner program. So now that we have 3 factors, our time, distance, and weight, we can focus on diverting whatever sort of steady progression we're looking for. So we can either increase the weight, keeping the same time and distance, increase the distance, keeping the same time and weight, or decrease the time, keeping the same weight and same distance. This is where you guys can sort of step outside of your comfort zone and play around with your own sort of programming and see what works for you. As long as we're aiming for that steady progression through the minor increases, or in this case for time, decreases, we can take a look at improving strength, endurance, cardiovascular capability, and overall progression for more fit training. Now that we have a plan and we have our programming, let's get into the practice of things, starting with the warm-up.
When it comes to warming up, we should be thinking about what joints will be involved when training and the muscles with it. For ruck marching, the main focus is on the lower body. Although, as demonstrated in the video, we are still warming up the shoulder girdle with some sky reaches, shoulder protractions, and arm circles to ensure that the upper back doesn't get too tight while carrying the rucksack and the shoulders are in a good position for holding the straps. Now let's break down the lower body, starting with the hips. Here, I am demonstrating the hip openers through 90-degree hip rocking. Leaning forward towards my front leg will open up my outer hip muscles, and as we turn our torso and lean towards our rear leg, we are now opening up our inner hip muscles. Getting into these positions for at least 30 seconds can attain that thorough warm-up necessary for the workout. Now let's move into some hip cars, or hip controlled articular rotations. Bringing the knee up in front of the body, rotate the leg around the hip joint until it's behind, then reverse the motion. Be gentle with rotating the leg around the hip, as the hip joint doesn't have as much lateral freedom as the other ball and socket joint, the shoulder, does. Next one for our hip are going to be some hip circles. It's good to spend some time on the hips, as it is a joint that gets injured or aggravated typically much later in training. We should get in the habit of thoroughly warming up this joint and the many muscles surrounding it before it's too late. After that, we'll move on to some leg swings, both front and back, and side to side. That way we're ballistically stretching our legs. Once that's done, we'll move into some butt kicks to get some synovial fluid moving in our knees, like the Tin Man and the oil can. This can be either done by high impact running on the spot, or low impact, moving at a slower pace depending on your comfort level. Let's warm up our ankles too while we're at it with some ankle rolls. Remember, while this is a warm-up targeted towards ruck marching, there are many different ways to mobilize for ruck marching outside of this demonstration. Go on our Facebook page at PSP Fitness Ottawa and look at our mobility or yoga videos to get some ideas for a proper warm-up. Lastly, we'll prime our muscles for the session with the sky reach to ground touch, hinging from the hips and stretching in our hamstring, to extending the hips and reaching overhead with a neutral spine. Followed by some air squats, again hinging from our hips, then bending our knees. With every movement done for 30 seconds each, this whole warm-up should take us about 12 to 15 minutes, as most proper warm-ups should, to ensure that we're ready. Now, let's get our rucksack ready and prepare to go outside.
Alright guys, now we're going to prepare the actual ruck. Now I just want to preface this by saying this is personal preference. This is what works for me, and I've talked to a few people on how they prepare their rucks as well and taken that into consideration. So starting with the bottom of the rucksack, because I have a short torso and this rucksack is pretty big for me, I'm not going to put the majority of the weight right at the bottom. We want the weight sitting closer to our hips with assistance from the lower belt. So I'm going to put my valise, my sleeping kit, to start off in the rucksack. This way, the dumbbells have something to sit on. Next, we're going to throw our weight in. Now, making sure that we don't have a massive 40-pound weight that's just jutting us in the back thrown at the bottom of the rucksack. We have two 10-pound dumbbells that we're going to use, and we're going to wrap them in some clothing so again we don't feel them jutting us in the back, because we do want them close to us in the rucksack. We want them close to our spine and our back. The closer the weight is to us, the easier it's going to be for us to carry, so that it's not trying to sway us or throw us off balance or pull the rucksack off our back. So again, taking the dumbbell, wrap it in any piece of clothing that's going to cover most of it up. Throw it down. So now I have both 10-pound weights in the rucksack on top of my valise. This is around the midpoint where our center of mass will be, and that's where we want our weight. We don't want to put our weight too close to the top, because you'll notice once you get into rougher terrain or you take a misstep, that rucksack is going to shift around. Now we're just going to take some miscellaneous light kit and throw it in the ruck. This plus the two 10-pound dumbbells and the ruck itself should add up to the 40 pounds we are looking for. To find out if this is the actual weight, simple way is to go on a bathroom scale, weigh yourself, then throw the ruck on, and then step on the scale again and see the weight difference to see if you need to add more or take out a bit. Now, if you don't have weights at your disposal, you can always fill it up with heavier kit. Whether you have mucklucks or other boots, your gas mask and carrier, your tack vest, or your helmet. This is the sort of stuff that can add up to the 40, 80, whatever sort of weight you're looking for. You just might need to take a bit longer to prepare the kit so that it's evenly weighted, especially around the waistline. And we do have a freezing rain warning, so normally I wouldn't recommend wearing a rain jacket because it's not breathable. Same thing goes for wearing wet weather boots. So I'm going to, for the sake of this demonstration, I am going to wear my rain jacket within my uniform. And speaking of uniforms, guys, talk to your chain of command on what you should be wearing for your actual ruck marches. If you're using military kit like myself instead of a regular backpack for ruck marching, you'll want to contact your chain of command just to see what is appropriate dress. Let's get dressed. Now, before you guys ask, yes, I am an active serving member in the military. I am a reservist within the Brockville Rifles Infantry Regiment. Now, regarding going outside and dressing for the cold, I just checked and it's about -2 right now. However, I'm not going to wear polypro, I'm not going to wear long johns. I'm only wearing the uniform as well as a rain jacket to prevent any sort of wind chill and a toque. The reason being is that normally we might dress a bit warmer. However, with a fully loaded rucksack on our back and we're marching at a pretty decent pace, the last thing we want to do is sweat too much, because once that sweat freezes, you get cold, you can get hypothermic, and you can go down pretty easily. So just making sure that you're cold enough to the point where you're not sweating too much. I have my regular boots on because we want to make this sort of ruck march training as accurate as possible to when we're on course, overseas, any sort of actual career operation or task. Let's go outside. All right, guys, we're approaching our first kilometer. And at this point, you might realize that you might have worn too many layers. It's not always a problem. If you're able to simply unzip part of your dress, as long as it's still uniform appropriate, make sure that there's adequate airflow going through and that you make sure you're not sweating and that sweat doesn't freeze. All right, guys, approaching the second kilometer, making sure that we're trying to stay on solid ground, that we're not slipping all over the snow. If you're on a trail, that's pretty tricky, but once we get into implementing time, the terrain can definitely have an effect, and the state of the terrain can slow your pace down. And also making sure that your water is easy to access, that it's not packed away in the ruck, and that you're staying hydrated. All right, guys, approaching the third kilometer, and if you experience blisters after this, if you're newer to ruck march training and you notice that your feet are hurting due to blistering, athletic tape is the way to go. Making sure that you have foot powder so that you can prevent blisters in the first place, but that you have athletic tape to tape your feet up when you still want to ruck march and your feet do have blisters. All right, guys, halfway through the third kilometer, almost done our first ruck march. And I just wanted to say, guys, if something's feeling off, like your hips are feeling jacked up, or your knees hurt, your ankles are hurting, don't power through. Turn around and head home, because now's not the time to power through. You're in training, right? Powering through is going to only lead to injury. If your muscles are sore, that's a different story, but make sure that you're using your best judgment. All right, guys, and we are home. Now, I know what you're thinking. As soon as you take off the ruck, you just want to sit down or take a nice hot shower, but let's move into a cool down, because your body's gonna thank you for it the next day.
Let's move into our cool down, holding each stretch for 20 seconds. Much like the warm-up, we're focusing on joints and muscles we work during our training session, starting with our hips. This is a cross-leg glute stretch, where we'll bring our knee across our torso and reach out to the side with the same hand, stretching both the glute max, glute med, as well as the piriformis. Diving deeper into the piriformis, let's do a figure 4 stretch, looping our same side arm through and pressing our elbow into our knee. We can now shift into a sideline quad stretch, and it will also stretch our hip flexors, pulling our foot behind us and shifting our hips forward without hyperextending our back. After that, we can sit up and move into a crossover hamstring stretch, leaning forward our chest and our belly button. Next, we'll do a simple butterfly stretch, focusing on loosening up our inner hip muscles. Then, we'll straighten our legs apart and bring our torso forward again to stretch the hamstring muscles a little more, with more focus on the inner hamstrings. Let's stand up and stretch out our calves on the wall. Remember to feel the stretch, but stretch without pain. A lot of people try to stretch as far as they can regardless, but your muscles will instinctively tense up once there is a pain reaction, so don't go too far. We may have felt the ruck pull on our shoulder blades a bit together, so let's release that upper back tension, reaching as far forward as we can with our fingers interlocked and look down, and that will wrap up our cool down.
Thanks very much for watching, guys. Today we went over the introduction to actual ruck march training, the programming and periodization training, the warm-up, the prepping of the ruck, prepping of yourself, the ruck march itself, and the cool down. So thanks again for watching, guys. Be sure to take a look at our other videos on YouTube, and take a look at our Facebook page at PSP Fitness Ottawa. And if you have any questions about specific ruck march programs for yourself, email one of these emails and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks again, guys, and take care.